Lately, I had started to feel like a stranger inside my own home, here in Burlington, Washington. My name is Linda Warren, and for most of my life, I believed family was the safest place in this world. But slowly, silently, everything shifted. My son Daniel and his wife Monica moved in 2 years ago after Daniel lost his tech job. At first, the house felt fuller, warmer, but as months passed, the warmth turned into cold air that followed me from room to room. Daniel spent most days locked in his room, searching for work, drowning in frustration. Monica, on the other hand, acted like she owned the house, my house, walking around with that stiff look as if she tolerated me out of duty. I cooked for them, cleaned for them, stayed silent for them, thinking maybe things would get better. But instead, cracks appeared everywhere, especially when Monica began making decisions without even speaking to me. Small things at first, changing the living room setup, throwing away old photo frames, replacing curtains without asking. But those small things chipped away pieces of me. I tried telling myself I was overreacting, that maybe this was just stress. But deep down, something wasn't right, and I could feel my home slipping away, inch by inch, day by day. What hurt the most was how my memories with my late husband Robert were being quietly erased. Every corner of this house held a piece of us. His woodwork, his favorite books, his laughter that once bounced through the halls. After he passed, I held on to those things because they were all I had left. But Monica saw them as old clutter, and Daniel, caught between, didn't speak up. One morning, I walked into the living room and froze. The wooden rocking chair Robert built for me, the last gift he made, was missing. When I asked Monica, she casually said it had a loose leg, and she donated it. She donated the most precious thing I had in this world. My throat burned, but I swallowed my tears. I didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want Daniel to feel stressed. I kept telling myself, maybe I'm overthinking. But losing that chair felt like losing Robert all over again. For the first time in years, loneliness didn't just sit next to me, it wrapped itself around my entire body. That evening, something inside me cracked. Daniel and Monica were laughing in the kitchen, making dinner for themselves, and no one asked if I had eaten. No one even noticed I was sitting alone in the dark dining room. I stared at the empty corner where my rocking chair used to be and felt something shift inside me, an ache mixed with disbelief. In that moment, I realized I wasn't living, I was disappearing. Not because I was old, not because I couldn't speak, but because the people I loved had stopped seeing me. And that night, for the first time, a question settled in my mind. A question I never imagined asking in my lifetime. What would happen if I stopped waiting for them to treat me right? What if I did something for myself for once? It was the beginning of a storm I didn't see coming. The next morning, I woke up determined to make things feel normal again. I prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. The way Daniel always loved when he was younger. Maybe, I thought, a familiar routine would bring us closer again. But when I set the table, they didn't come out. The plates sat untouched. I stood there holding the coffee pot, heat warming my hands while the rest of me felt cold. Eventually, Daniel came out, earbuds plugged in, eyes glued to his phone. He grabbed a banana and muttered, "We're heading out. Monica wants brunch." No eye contact, no, "Thanks, Mom." Just nothing. And Monica walked right past the table without a glance. It felt like being invisible. The silence they left behind was louder than any argument we could have had. After they left, I sat at the table thinking about the kind of mother I had always tried to be. Gentle, supportive, forgiving. But maybe my silence was being mistaken for weakness. I cleaned the table slowly, letting my thoughts spill freely for the first time. I wasn't angry. I was hurt, deeply hurt. And the more I replayed their behavior, the more I realized how much I had allowed myself to shrink just to keep peace. That wasn't love. That wasn't family. Maybe I needed to accept something painful. Daniel wasn't the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees anymore. Life had changed him, and no matter how much I wished otherwise, I couldn't force my place in his life. But did that mean I had to disappear quietly? No. A voice inside me whispered, "You deserve more than this." Later that afternoon, I found something that shattered me. I opened the storage closet looking for old photo albums. Instead, I found two large garbage bags filled with my belongings. My ceramic vases, the embroidered tablecloth Robert's mother had made, and even framed pictures of my wedding. Someone had packed them away without telling me. I held the wedding frame in my hands, dust clinging to the glass. My hands trembled, not out of anger, but grief. These were my memories, my life. And someone had decided they didn't belong in the home Robert and I built together. Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away. That grief slowly hardened into something steadier, clarity. I realized they weren't going to stop until everything of mine was gone. And if I didn't take control, I would lose the last pieces of myself, too. That evening, when Daniel and Monica returned, they were laughing about a new rooftop restaurant. They didn't notice my red eyes. They didn't notice my silence. But something felt different in me. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was waking up. Sometimes, pain pushes you toward decisions you never imagined making. And that night, for the first time, I imagined what my life could look like if I stopped begging for the love I deserved and started choosing myself. The thought was terrifying, but liberating. For days, I watched them closely, not out of revenge, but out of realization. I needed to understand what had changed in my own home. And slowly, small details revealed a bigger truth. Monica had begun handling all the household expenses without involving me. She kept the mail in their room, ordered supplies without asking, even paid utility bills from my account because Daniel had the passwords. I didn't want to believe it, but the signs were everywhere. My financial independence, the one thing I held on to after Robert passed, was being chipped away quietly. And Daniel, caught in his own frustrations and ego, didn't see how this was affecting me. Or maybe he saw and didn't care. That truth hurt more than anything else. I had given my entire life to raising him, protecting him, encouraging him. And now I was living like an unwanted guest in my own home. One evening, I found the courage to ask Daniel if everything was okay. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and said, "Mom, we're adults. Let us handle things." He said it so casually, not realizing how deeply the words cut. Let us handle things. As if I had no role, no voice, no right to the life I built. Monica, standing behind him, folded her arms with that silent smirk she tried to hide. That moment told me something I didn't want to accept. Monica wasn't just careless with my feelings. She saw me as an obstacle, and Daniel had become too dependent on her to see anything clearly. I felt myself drifting away from them emotionally, not out of choice, but out of survival. But the moment that truly changed everything came the next morning. I overheard Monica talking on the phone, her voice low but sharp. She was discussing a plan to renovate the house once we move Linda into assisted living. My name, my future, my home, decided without me. My breathing turned shallow, my chest tight. Assisted living? I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. This wasn't care. This was convenience. They wanted the house, Robert's house, my house. And I knew then that if I didn't act, they would take everything. I sat on the edge of my bed for hours, holding the photo of Robert. His gentle smile stared back at me as if urging me to be strong. I whispered, I don't know what to do. But then I remembered something he always said. When people show you their intentions, don't ignore them. And that day, intentions had been revealed clearly. I wasn't safe here, not emotionally, not financially. And for the first time since the pain began, I felt something new inside me. Resolve. I wasn't going to let anyone erase me. I wasn't going to wait for things to get worse. I was going to make a decision they never saw coming. By the next morning, I had made my decision quietly, without panic, without tears. I needed a plan, not just an emotional reaction. Emotional reactions were what had kept me trapped this long. So I grabbed a notebook and started listing everything that mattered: my keepsakes, my documents, my savings, the things Robert left for me. And as I wrote, something inside me shifted. I realized I didn't need permission to take my life back. I just needed courage. I walked around the house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the picture frames still left. I knew this place had once been filled with love, but clinging to memories wasn't saving me anymore. It was drowning me. So I chose something I never imagined choosing. I would leave before they pushed me out. I didn't tell a soul what I was planning. Not Daniel, not Monica. I moved quietly, calmly. I gathered my important documents first: birth certificate, insurance papers, the deed Robert and I shared. They had been buried under piles of unsolicited mail Monica kept adding to. I placed everything safely in a folder and tucked it into my handbag. Then, over the next few days, I slowly packed my personal items into small bags and hid them under my bed. I didn't want to alarm anyone. They weren't the type to get physically aggressive, but emotional manipulation was their favorite language, and I was done speaking it. During this time, I kept noticing things I had ignored before: how Monica treated the house as a stepping stone, how Daniel avoided serious conversations, how they both wanted something from me that had nothing to do with love. That realization didn't break me the way I expected. It made me stronger. Pain was turning into clarity. Fear was turning into direction. For the first time in years, I was acting not as a mother desperate to be included, but as a woman who knew her worth. The night before I was planning to leave, Daniel and Monica were sitting in the living room discussing loan plans for their future home, my home. I stood quietly near the hallway, listening. Monica said, "Once Linda moves out, the refinance process will be smoother." They were already planning a life that didn't include me, and they didn't even think they were doing anything wrong. That hurt, but it also sealed my decision. Later, when I went to bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I wasn't afraid of leaving. I was afraid of what staying would turn me into: bitter, resentful, broken. Robert wouldn't have wanted that. And deep down, I knew I deserved peace. I deserved a life where I wasn't treated like a burden. So I whispered to myself, tomorrow, everything changes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope instead of fear. The morning I left didn't feel like an escape. It felt like reclaiming something I had lost: myself. I woke up before sunrise, the world still dark and quiet. I moved gently, packing the last of my things into a small suitcase. I wore my warmest coat, the one Robert bought me on our 25th anniversary trip. It made me feel protected. I walked through each room one last time, not to mourn, but to say goodbye. Goodbye to the version of me who stayed silent. Goodbye to the years I tried to fit into a space that kept shrinking around me. Goodbye to the home that no longer felt like mine. I left a short note on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional, just the truth. I'm safe. I need time for myself. Please don't worry. I knew Monica wouldn't care, but Daniel, he would feel something. Maybe guilt, maybe confusion. But this time, their reactions weren't my responsibility. My only responsibility was to myself. I stepped outside, closed the door gently, and didn't look back. For once, the cold Washington air felt refreshing, not harsh. I walked to the bus stop, my suitcase rolling behind me. I didn't have a concrete plan yet, but I had options. I had savings. I had friends I hadn't seen in years. And most importantly, I had freedom. As I waited for the bus, the sky turned pale blue, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Robert died: lightness. Like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't running from loneliness. I was running toward peace. When the bus arrived, I settled into a window seat, watching the town blur past. My phone buzzed with calls from Daniel. I didn't answer. He needed to feel the absence he had created. Maybe he would understand what he had taken for granted. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, I was done sacrificing myself for people who didn't value me. I leaned my head against the window and allowed myself to breathe deeply, fully, without fear of judgment. As the bus drove farther, I finally let the tears fall. Not from sadness, but from relief. I wasn't disappearing. I wasn't losing everything. I was choosing myself after decades of putting others first. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of the story. Because sooner or later, Daniel and Monica would realize what they had lost. And when they did, they wouldn't believe what I did next. The bus carried me all the way to Port Angeles, a place Robert and I once visited on a quiet summer weekend, and it felt like the right destination. Far enough to give me space, yet familiar enough to not feel lost. When I stepped off the bus, the salty wind from the harbor touched my face, almost as if welcoming me back to myself. I checked into a small, old-fashioned inn near the water, one with creaky wooden floors and lace curtains that reminded me of simpler days. After placing my suitcase in the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself breathe without worry, without the constant tension of walking on eggshells in my own home. It felt strange, almost surreal, to have silence around me that wasn't heavy or suffocating. This silence felt peaceful, the kind that allows you to hear your own thoughts again. I spent the afternoon walking along the shoreline, watching seagulls circle the waves, feeling the wind push back my hair. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive. My phone kept buzzing. Daniel's calls, messages from unknown numbers, likely Monica's attempts to reach me, but I kept it on silent. I needed this distance. I needed him to feel the void he had created with his indifference. In the evening, I sat at a small cafe overlooking the harbor, sipping warm tea while thinking about the years I had spent sacrificing my needs for Daniel's. I wasn't angry anymore. I was grieving the mother I had been, the version of myself who thought love meant staying even when it hurt. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and purple, I knew leaving wasn't just an act of survival. It was the first step toward rebuilding my soul. That night, I slept deeply, without fear, without tears, without the weight of anyone's expectations crushing me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, the uncertainty didn't scare me. It excited me. The next morning began with a knock on my door, a soft, hesitant tapping that made my heart jump. For a second I panicked, thinking somehow Daniel had tracked me down. But when I cracked open the door, I found Helen Brooks, an old friend from a quilting club I used to attend in my 40s. She lived in Port Angeles now and happened to recognize me when she spotted me walking along the shoreline the previous afternoon. Seeing her smile, warm, genuine, familiar, felt like a hand reaching into my loneliness and pulling me out. Helen hugged me tightly, and just that simple gesture nearly brought me to tears. We sat in the inn's tiny dining hall, drinking coffee as I hesitantly explained what had been happening at home. She listened without interrupting, her eyes soft with empathy, shaking her head occasionally as if she could barely believe what she was hearing. When I finished, She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, saying gently, "Linda, honey, you didn't leave your home. You left a situation that was destroying you." Her words gave me a strength I didn't know I still had. Helen invited me to stay with her for a few days, and although I was embarrassed to intrude, she insisted with that same warm stubbornness she'd always had. Her home was small but filled with life, plants on every shelf, books stacked in every corner, and a golden retriever named Maple who immediately curled up at my feet as if she'd known me forever. For the first time in months, I felt welcomed. I spent the day helping Helen with small chores, folding laundry, watering plants, talking about everything and nothing. It reminded me of who I was before my world had shrunk into quiet suffering. That evening, while Helen cooked dinner, I sat with Maple and allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't revolve around Daniel or Monica. A future where I made choices based on what I needed, not on what others expected. I knew I wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And as that realization settled in, something inside me loosened, like chains falling from my chest. Late that night, after Helen had gone to bed, I finally checked my phone. There were nearly 50 missed calls from Daniel and a few messages from him that swung wildly between panic and irritation. First, he wrote, "Mom, where are you? Call me." Then, "Monica is upset. You left without saying anything." Then, "We need to talk about the house paperwork." And finally, the message that made my stomach twist. "You can't just walk away like this. We need to know your plans." My plans. As if my life were a project for them to manage. Reading his words made my emotions churn, but instead of weakening me, they strengthened my resolve. They weren't worried about me being safe. They were worried about losing control. I locked my phone again and placed it on the table, staring at it like it was an object from a past life. For so long, I had been available at every moment, answering every call, rushing to solve every problem Daniel had. But he had forgotten that I was a person too, with feelings, with needs, with limits. The next morning, I went for a long walk alone, letting the cold air clear my mind. I thought about Robert, about the life we built, and about how proud he would be that I finally stood up for myself. At a quiet viewpoint near the harbor, I sat on a bench and whispered to the wind, "I'm not doing this anymore. Not for guilt, not for obligation. I'm choosing me." And as I said it, I felt my heart settle into a calm rhythm. When I returned to Helen's house, she noticed the change in my face. "You look lighter," she said gently. And I was. That day, I made a promise to myself. A promise that whatever came next, I would not let anyone make me feel small again. A few days passed peacefully, but the quiet couldn't last forever. I knew Daniel would eventually escalate, and he did. On the fourth morning at Helen's house, I woke to a voicemail from him, his voice tense, frustrated, almost indignant. "Mom, this is getting ridiculous. Monica says we can't plan anything until you tell us what you're doing. We found your note, but that's not enough. You need to come back so we can discuss things properly." Discuss things properly. The words sounded rehearsed, as if Monica had fed them to him. It stung, knowing he still didn't understand why I left. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about logistics, property, plans, convenience. My heart squeezed painfully, but the pain didn't overwhelm me the way it once did. It clarified everything. Instead of calling him back, I sat with Helen at her kitchen table and told her the truth I had been avoiding. "I don't think I can go back." She didn't pressure me, didn't tell me I was overreacting. She simply nodded and said, "Then you make a new life, piece by piece." Those words sparked something inside me, possibility. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the idea of living independently again, building a small life where I wasn't overlooked or manipulated. That afternoon, I walked through the local community center, picking up brochures about senior fitness classes, book clubs, and craft groups. I imagined myself joining them, laughing with new people, finding joy in things again. It wasn't about running from my old life. It was about creating a new one. Still, a part of me felt unsettled, wondering how Daniel would react when he finally realized I wasn't coming home. And a quiet voice inside whispered, "He will understand only when he feels the consequences of his choices." That evening, as I watched the sunset from Helen's porch, I realized I no longer felt fear about the future, only curiosity. My peace didn't last long. The next morning, as I watered Helen's plants, my phone buzzed with a message that froze me in place. It was from Monica, her tone sharp, accusatory, dripping with entitlement. "Linda, we need access to the house documents. This is irresponsible. You leaving has put us in a very difficult situation. We can't move forward unless you cooperate." That word, cooperate, sent a wave of heat through my chest. She wasn't even pretending to care about my well-being. She wanted the house. She wanted control. And she was angry that I had taken it away. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a surge of strength I didn't recognize in myself before. I realized then that leaving wasn't just about finding peace. It had disrupted their plans, plans that didn't include my dignity. I showed Helen the message, and she raised an eyebrow. "Honey, that woman doesn't want you. She wants your property." Hearing someone else say it out loud made the truth impossible to soften. That afternoon, I walked to the harbor again, letting the wind hit my face as I sorted through my thoughts. If Daniel and Monica wanted a conversation, they would have to wait. I wasn't ready. I wasn't going to be pressured or manipulated back into a situation that nearly broke me. I had a right to my peace, my safety, my home. And if protecting that peace meant holding firm, then that's what I would do. As the sun sank behind the mountains, I made a decision. Daniel needed to understand that I wasn't the weak, quiet mother they could push around. I wasn't disappearing. I wasn't surrendering. This was my life, and I was reclaiming every last piece of it. And whatever came next, they wouldn't believe what I was about to do. 2 days later, as I sat at Helen's kitchen table, sorting through old envelopes I had brought with me, I stumbled upon something I hadn't noticed before. A thin, yellowed folder tucked inside a stack of old birthday cards. The handwriting on it was Robert's. My breath caught in my throat as I carefully opened it. Inside was a notarized addendum to our original property documents, signed nearly 20 years earlier, giving me sole legal control over the house and explicitly stating that no transfer or sale could occur without my written consent. My hands began to shake, not in fear this time, but in a strange mix of relief and vindication. Robert had protected me even after death. He had seen the possibility of conflict long before I had, and this document was his final act of love. Tears gathered in my eyes as I whispered, "Thank you, Rob." But the discovery didn't stop there. At the bottom of the folder was a small USB drive labeled for Linda only. I plugged it into my laptop with trembling fingers, and a single audio file popped up. When I hit play, Robert's calm, familiar voice filled the room. He spoke gently about our home, our life together, and his fear that Daniel's growing ambition and impulsive financial decisions might one day put me in a vulnerable position. "If that day ever comes," he said softly in the recording, "trust your instincts, sweetheart. Don't let anyone pressure you. Use this document. Protect yourself." Hearing his voice broke something open inside me. It was as if he had reached across time to stand beside me, guiding me when I felt most alone. That evening, I sat quietly with the folder in my lap, and for the first time since leaving, I felt empowered, not just emotionally, but legally. Daniel and Monica couldn't force me into anything. Their plans to access the house papers, their attempts to control the situation, none of it mattered now. I had the truth, I had proof, and I had Robert's voice reminding me exactly who I was. As I watched Helen reading the document with a slow nod, she whispered, "Linda, this changes everything." And it did. Suddenly, the fear I had carried for weeks dissolved, replaced by a calm, steady certainty. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. The next chapter of this story would begin on my terms, not theirs. The next morning, with the legal document secured safely in my bag, I finally returned Daniel's call, not out of obligation, but out of strength. When he answered, his voice was sharp and restless. "Mom, finally. You can't just disappear like that. We've been trying to reach you." I stayed silent for a moment, letting his urgency fill the air. Then I said, in a steady voice, "Daniel, I know what you and Monica are planning." He paused, clearly thrown off balance, before forcing a shaky laugh. "Planning? Mom, we just need clarity. You're overthinking." But when I told him about the old legal document, the one legally preventing him from making decisions about the house, his tone shifted instantly, from fake concern to pure irritation. "So that's how it is," he snapped. "You're choosing to complicate things? Mom, we had everything sorted. Why would you make it worse?" His words cut deep, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed the truth. My well-being hadn't been a priority for him in a long time. Only convenience was. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Daniel," I said quietly, "this isn't about paperwork. This is about the way you and Monica have treated me." There was a long silence. Then his anger cracked through the phone. "You left us. You're acting like a child. Do you have any idea what this has done to Monica?" I almost laughed. Monica, the woman who had made my life a silent misery, was suddenly the victim. When he realized I wasn't budging, he dropped the facade entirely. "Fine," he said coldly. "Do whatever you want. Just remember this when things fall apart. You're the one choosing to break the family." And he hung up. I stared at the phone, stunned but strangely relieved. His reaction confirmed everything I had feared but never wanted to believe. He didn't want me back. He wanted control. Helen sat across from me, her expression soft but determined. "Now you know exactly where you stand," she said gently. And she was right. It hurt, but pain was clarity, and I finally saw the situation without illusions. That evening, I walked along the harbor again, letting the cold wind numb the ache in my chest. Robert's voice echoed in my mind, "Protect yourself." And I realized that sometimes protection meant letting go, not to punish, not to escape, but to survive. When I returned to Helen's house, I felt a calm resolve settling into my bones. I wasn't calling again. I wasn't explaining again. The next move would be mine, and it would change everything. After that call, I decided it was time to stop lingering in the shadows of indecision. The next morning, with the sunrise barely touching the windows, I walked into a local law office Helen recommended. Small, private, and known for handling elder protection cases. The attorney, a calm woman named Marissa Clark, listened patiently as I explained everything. The coldness at home, the pressure, the manipulation, the voicemail about cooperating, and the sudden obsession with house documents. When I handed her Robert's signed addendum and played the audio recording from the USB, her eyes widened slightly. "Linda," she said, leaning forward, "this is not just protection. This is power. They can't legally force you into any decision, and if they keep pressuring you, we can file an injunction." Hearing those words lifted something heavy off my shoulders. For months I had felt small, trapped, dependent. And now, sitting in that quiet office, I finally felt seen, as a person with rights, dignity, and a voice. Marissa drafted a formal notice stating that no property decisions were to be discussed, pursued, or pressured without my attorney present. She also added a clause requiring all communication to be respectful, non-coercive, and documented. When she slid the papers across the table for me to sign, my hands didn't even tremble. I left the office feeling like the air had grown thinner and clearer around me. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. But peace never lasts when truth is involved. A few hours later, Daniel called again, this time raging. "What is this lawyer nonsense?" he shouted. "Why are you doing this to us?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm protecting myself," I replied simply. He scoffed, incredulous. "From your own family?" My heart tightened, but I didn't let my resolve crack. Family doesn't threaten. Family doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't make you feel small. That silence after my words was so deep, it felt like the world had paused. Then he exploded into accusations, calling me ungrateful, dramatic, easily influenced by others. I listened quietly and then said, "Daniel, I love you, but I will not let you treat me this way anymore." And for the first time in our entire relationship, I hung up first. That night, I sat with Helen on her porch, watching the lights shimmer across the water. "You did the right thing," she said softly. And I believed her, not because she said it, but because I finally felt it. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself without apology. The storm wasn't over, but I no longer feared it. I had survived worse, and now I was armed with truth. 2 days passed quietly, almost too quietly. Then, on a rainy afternoon, Daniel sent a message that shook me, not with fear, but with profound sadness. "Mom, I hope you're happy. Your lawyer mess ruined everything." The buyer walked away. "Monica is furious. I'm drowning here. I can't believe you did this to us." Even in distress, he framed it as something I had done to him, ignoring everything that had led to this moment. I stared at the screen, feeling a throb behind my eyes. Not grief, not guilt, but a deep, exhausted disappointment. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man who refused to take responsibility for his own choices. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something painful but necessary. Every time I rescued Daniel, I robbed him of the chance to grow. And every time he hurt me, I told myself he didn't mean it. But the truth was simple. He meant it every time, and he only regretted it when consequences arrived. That evening, Helen and I sat by her fireplace while rain tapped the windows. "He's scared," she said quietly, "but fear doesn't excuse cruelty." I nodded, letting the warmth of the fire soften the heaviness in my chest. My mind wandered back to the years after Robert died, the years I had spent pouring every ounce of myself into keeping Daniel afloat. I had given him money when bills piled up. I had watched his daughter for weeks when he and Monica needed a break. I had stayed silent whenever Monica blamed me for things I didn't do. I had sacrificed parts of myself until I no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. And now? They wanted my home, too. The place where Robert and I built a life. The place filled with memories, laughter, tears, love. I realized then that Daniel wasn't losing a property. He was losing control. And I wasn't losing a son. I was losing an illusion. The next morning, I attended a senior art class at the community center. As I painted soft strokes of blue along a canvas, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The woman beside me, a cheerful retired teacher, made me laugh with stories about her grandchildren. For the first time since leaving Daniel's house, I didn't feel like someone who had been pushed out. I felt like someone starting fresh. When I returned to Helen's house, Maple the golden retriever greeted me with the kind of unconditional warmth I realized I had been craving for years. Closure came sooner than I expected. A week later, Daniel arrived at Helen's house, unannounced. I saw him through the window, shoulders slumped, eyes tired, a man carrying the weight of consequences he never expected. When I opened the door, he stood there silently for a moment before whispering, "Mom, can we talk?" We sat in Helen's living room, Maple curled at my feet like a quiet guardian. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then the words poured out of him: anger, frustration, fear, regret. "I messed everything up," he said, voice cracking. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought, I thought you'd be okay with it. I didn't realize how much I hurt you." His honesty, raw, unpolished, hit me harder than his cruelty ever had. Maybe because for the first time he wasn't blaming me. He was taking responsibility. I took a deep breath before speaking. "Daniel, I love you. I always will. But love doesn't mean letting myself disappear." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he looked like the boy I used to soothe after nightmares. "Can you forgive me?" he whispered. I reached for his hand, squeezed it gently. "I already have," I said softly. "But forgiving you doesn't mean going back to the way things were." He nodded slowly, absorbing the words without fighting them. "I want to do better," he said. "I'll try." I believed him, not because of his tears, but because something in his voice had changed. He understood now. Boundaries weren't betrayal. Independence wasn't abandonment. Respect wasn't optional. We talked for nearly an hour about the house, about Monica, about the years of pressure I had ignored for too long. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me tightly, the kind of hug I hadn't felt from him in years, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." After he left, I stepped onto the porch, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs. I felt peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't rely on anyone else's approval. I wasn't returning home because I had already found a new one within myself. My life wasn't ending. It was beginning again. And as I watched the sun sink slowly behind the water, I thought of Robert. How proud he would be that I had finally chosen myself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival. This chapter of my life had taught me something that took 70 years to learn. Love your family, yes, but protect yourself when they stop protecting you. And that was the ending I never knew I needed.